Everybody knows that the journey of building companies is hard. And the folks that tend to be able to be the most resilient and to push through the setbacks and the challenges tend to be the ones who understand their purpose and the value of what they're doing.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back to MPods. Today, we're so excited to welcome our 11th guest speaker, Erika Block, a professor at Center of Entrepreneurship at the University of Michigan. So to give a brief background, she's also the principal at Sticky Lab. And before that, she had her two own startups. One is called Saganworks, and the other is Local Orbit. She started her career as an art area, and she was also doing a lot of performing projects as a director at that time. Besides that, she's also a UMich alumni. So go blue.
Yeah. Go blue.
Yeah. Thanks for joining us today, Erika. I wonder, to begin with, could you tell us a little bit more about yourself from your perspective?
Sure. It's good to be here. I really like what you guys are doing. So I appreciate this and to hear all these different alumni voices. As you can tell from Lynn's little bit of intro, I have a pretty unconventional background. I'm actually a writer. I'm a playwright by training. I have an MFA in playwriting, and I spent the first 15 years of my career making theater for my day job as a living. And so we'll talk a little bit more as we go through this, but essentially I've always kind of listened and paid attention to what was in front of me. And then that's kind of led me through some unconventional steps. I don't love rules. I like bending rules. And, I thought a lot, people ask me, what's the commonality? And I think one of the things is that I'm really good at connecting dots between different ideas and connecting people that don't normally come together and creating experiences and also companies from that. So that's sort of the high level about me.
Yeah, I mean, that's really great. We know that you founded a lot of startups and you are also the co-founder of Walk and Squat Performance Project. I wonder, could you share with us, how is your studying experience in Michigan help you with all of those?
Yeah. So Walk and Squawk was actually my first startup. It was a nonprofit theater company. They came out of I was working with other artists, and we decided that we were doing work that wasn't conventional. Again, it was sort of alternative theater, and we started doing touring work, and it led to creating a company, and which was really creating a nonprofit is no different from any kind of business startup. It's about finding people, vision, money, board. And my background at Michigan, it was influential in two ways. And the first is I got a Bachelor of General Studies. I probably took more English classes. I don't think I took the prerequisites, but I probably had enough English credits to be an English major. But I really wanted to do a broad-based liberal arts education. So I took literature, philosophy, film, economics, sociology, political science. And I think that broad exposure to different ways of seeing the world and different ways of processing information was really critical to being able to connect the dots and all of the things that I've done. So not specializing and not focusing on the skills or only learning one language, as in economics as a language, poli-sci as a language, literature as a language. So I think it was that broad base. But then the other thing, when I started out, even in high school and younger, I really thought I was going to be a journalist. And it was a mix of writing and photography. And I had an internship. I spent a year, actually. I transferred from Michigan and I did a junior year at NYU. And then I actually came back to Ann Arbor to finish. So when I was in New York, I had an interview at the Village Voice, which is like sort of the premier alternative weekly newspaper in the country. And I worked with a theater editor and saw a lot of performance. And so when I came back to Michigan, I decided to take a playwriting class. And I had no idea, but Michigan had a really fantastic class with a professor who flew in every week from New York to teach. And he was also a Michigan alum. And that class changed the trajectory of my life. That's when I decided, oh, there's something to this. It's about writing and story. It's about being in person with people and creating experiences, but it's also really about collaboration. Writers can go away and write, but theater is about working with teams and seeing what other people do with your ideas and integrating all of those different ways of thinking. So that was really a class I took at Michigan, changed the trajectory of my life. And then I'll kind of leap forward. So, I'm filling in for somebody in Finding Your Venture, the class that Lynn is in. But I teach the practicum, which is sort of the sort of deeper dive. And then I also have been developing a course. I teach a graduate course called Creativity and Product Development. And we can talk about that a little bit later, but I use an exercise that my playwriting professor, when I was an undergraduate, gave us, and I've adapted it to my entrepreneurship class. And one of the things that artists know is, is good artists steal. They look at cool ideas and they acknowledge them, and you kind of learn from what came before. So one of the things I have my graduate students do every week in their reflections, they have to think about a product or a service or an experience that they would steal and why, and also the opposite. What wouldn't they steal and why? And that goes back to my playwriting professor at Michigan, who asked us to do that with every play and movie we saw. So Michigan had a lot of impact on where I am now, all these years later.
I think you mentioned the idea of still is also like you find some ways working on or solving a problem, but it's not super efficient, or you can have a better way to solve it. So that's a really good way to think about entrepreneurship. And I know in your career path, you had the experience of leading cross sectors, partnership in different countries. How did you maximize the creativity and how do you maximize the productivity?
Yeah. So the cross-sector, the partnerships are interesting. So with Flock and Squawk, I had a co-founder who's British, and I did a lot of work in the UK. And then we were back in the States and decided to come back to Ann Arbor, in fact, and stay in Michigan. And I was sort of thinking, well, what's important to me in my life if I'm going to have this company? At that point, a nonprofit theater company, you're thinking, I'm not going to make a ton of money. I'm going to make a living enough to live decently. If I'm not going to make a lot of money, what's important to me? And one of the things that was really important was continuing to work and spend time internationally, again, for ideas and experiences and engagement. And we laid out a sort of 5-year plan. And literally, like within 3 weeks of laying out that plan, we got invited to go to South Africa and be in residence at a university. This was in 1996. We were invited to work with university students who were the first students to be educated after apartheid. So, in South Africa, you had years and years where people were segregated and didn't mix by race. So all of a sudden, apartheid ended. Nelson Mandela was the president of South Africa after being in prison for many, many years. And students that had been educated for high school and elementary years were all of a sudden put in university together. They spoke different languages. They had different understanding of the world. They had very different education levels. And because of the way that we worked with theater, using movement and physical work a lot, we were invited to help bridge the gap between the experiences of those students and helping them create a collaborative theater piece. So what happened is, from that point, for about 9 years, we did a lot of exchange work back and forth between South Africa and the States, some work in the United Kingdom as well. And in order to do that, the internet was young then. We were using dial-up AOL to communicate when we were overseas. We were organizing projects through text messages on flip phones. And some of the people we were working with were in rural areas that didn't have electricity, that would have a little local shop that would have a car battery where people would pay to charge their devices. So we ended up needing to create partnerships to do this. And so just the execution of this required a lot of creative thinking. Yet in the same time, we were also working with people to create art and to tell the stories. And we ended up, having American and South African artists collaborate, lots of back and forth exchange work, bringing in both performance artists, singers, dancers, also did visual arts exchange, where we'd have American artists and South African artists exchanging work for display. And, I think the creativity came not just in the production of the work, of the artistic work, and the talks and the politics that were sort of the activities that surrounded the art, but just in terms of figuring out how to fund it, how to build partnerships, how to just really kind of say, we're going to make this happen. And we were a small organization. So we leveraged the power of partnerships, community activists. There had been a lot of folks in Detroit who were activists, and academic institutions. We worked with the University of Michigan. We worked with the universities in South Africa. So it was sort of everything about it was creative, in that we had to come up with ways to do things that just hadn't been done before.
I know you also started a supply chain platform. So I wonder what inspired you to establish that platform.
So Local Orbit started as a theater project. It was going to be a walk and squawk production about food called A History of Eating. So the work that I did in South Africa, we'll kind of back up a little bit, got me very interested in technology and new technology for storytelling. This was before Google Maps was everywhere. And I was thinking a lot about mapping technology for stories, and how maps that we see, or that we used to see, were created by, people who had control over map making. Yet there were lots of maps and lots of stories and geographies that had alternative perspectives. And so I was really interested in the possibility of new mapping technologies, social technology, social media storytelling, as a way to bring those stories to light. So I went back to graduate school for a year. I went back to NYU to their interactive technology program, which is kind of part art, part business. And as I started thinking about technology in my theater practice, started developing a project around food and doing interviews. Well, the interviews turned into an accidental customer discovery process for Local Orbit, because I started to talk to farmers and food producers and chefs and people at like hospitals and schools that were feeding folks, restaurant owners, and everybody was trying to develop more local food systems and supply chains, but they had a consistent set of problems. And so I was having a conversation with somebody about what I was learning, and I understood technology in a new way, having gone back and studied. And literally somebody said, well, you could do a really cool cross-disciplinary theater project, or you could build something to solve that problem that you identified. And so it took me, I had to decide to walk away from the theater company and figure out how to do a startup. And basically Local Orbit went from being a theater project to the supply chain management platform for local systems, which is my first tech startup.
How did you acquire the first few customers?
I went back to some of the people that I interviewed when I was doing theater. And then I started sort of saying, okay, where do I go to find out how to reach people? And looked at, what are the events? What are the organizations? And just really immersed myself in what was happening with local food systems, went to conferences, both in Michigan and the Midwest, but nationally. And, people had the problem. So it wasn't hard to get people to use it once they understood what it could do. And so we did a very basic, we adapted some off-the-shelf e-commerce software. So we did these test markets that came through connections that started with those early interviews when I was still working on the theater project. And I just started showing up to places, to events, to conferences, calling people, and this is something I know, Lynn, you learn in finding your venture. You just go out and talk to people. And even though I didn't have experience in food systems, I actually was a huge organic gardener and, grew a lot of my own food and understood a lot about local food from my own personal interests. And so I at least could speak enough of the language. And I indirectly grew up in a family where I had various folks in the food business. So I had, again, language that I could draw on in talking to people. So we got these first 2 markets in place, and we were very hands-on. And that was sort of the proof of concept. And it was from there, I said, okay, we fleshed out what the opportunity looked like and went out and raised money and built the company.
So talking to another startup, the Saganworks, I actually also use that platform in my museum and society class. Like we are asked to use the platform as a curator to do our art exhibition. But that's a totally different sector. And how did you do that?
First of all, that's really cool that you did that because, that was a surprise to hear that. So when we decided it was time, we sold Local Orbit to a customer, and I was trying to figure out my next gig. One of my investors in Local Orbit approached me and asked me to be the CEO and co-founder of Saganworks. So it wasn't my idea, which is unusual. He showed me a game on his iPad it was a room that you unlock and you go deeper and deeper into the room. It was really about 3D spaces. And he was struggling with the problem that a lot of us have, in that the more we do digitally, the more our knowledge and our links and our photos and our documents and our recordings are on our computers and in the cloud, the harder it is to find them. There's so much. And part of the problem is, even now, because I think Saganworks is making progress, but the tech, it hasn't solved the problem. It's still early days in the tech. But when you look at something in a flat file or, in an icon or some kind of a hierarchical folder structure, it's really hard to find stuff. And even if we have great search, AI is making a difference, but we are programmed as humans to think visually and spatially. So our visual and spatial memory is more powerful than when you read something or see something flat. So when you walk into a room, you kind of know where to look. Like I'm looking at, I know if I want to go find that book or where that pile of papers is. We kind of have this sense of where our stuff is in the spaces around us. And so that's what Saganworks is looking at, how visual and spatial memory can be used to help us better organize and access our stuff without some algorithm doing it for us. And also to help us to create and curate displays and experiences with that information. And so what was interesting about it actually was closer to my storytelling and community building and knowledge sharing roots as a playwright, theater maker, sort of collector of knowledge and ideas. So it was this merger of what I had learned building a tech startup with knowledge and ideas and storytelling in 3D spaces. So it wasn't as different. I think one of the things that I know, and I see this the more I work with companies, is that the nuts and bolts of building a company are the same no matter what you do. I don't care if it's a nonprofit or even a small business. When and then you have to understand technology, but once you get the right people or you know how to speak the language, it doesn't matter what sector you're in. You have some core entrepreneurial skills. And then, for a lot of people, having a fresh perspective in a new space, or bringing in context from, like if I bring in supply chain management to climate tech stuff right now, there's a relevance that helps you think a little bit differently than the people that were narrowly trained in that space. So that my ability to be a generalist, but with some core entrepreneurial skills and the ability to ask questions, like my kind of innate curiosity, I think is what has enabled me to work across different spaces and industries. And I think that increasingly there's more and more value to that, because I don't think that having a really narrow frame of reference is the answer to most of the problems that we face now and will face into the future.
Yeah, I totally agree. And especially for the storytelling part, I think whatever is for startups or as a curator, it's all about telling a story. And I know you have another identity, like as a board for Founders Fund. So do you want to share like one key insight when you're guiding those different startups?
Yeah, I work as a mentor with Techstars, advisory board with Michigan Foundation. Also, I spent a lot of time working with, the majority of my mentorship is actually with VentureWell. I work with a lot of companies specifically around climate and energy. And I think that, story is key. You can have really great ideas and really great technology, but if the founders and inventors can't communicate it or find people who can communicate it, it doesn't go anywhere. It doesn't mean story without substance, but you have to be able to communicate in ways that are human and in ways that convey your values and your value proposition. So the other thing I think is, it goes back to what we've talked about, is that the startup founders who I think are the most successful, even early in their journey, tend to be really good listeners more than they are talkers. Doesn't mean they can't speak well, but they listen and ask questions. And then I know you asked me for one, but I'll give you the third thing is really, everybody knows that the journey of building companies is hard. And the folks that tend to be able to be the most resilient and to push through the setbacks and the challenges tend to be the ones who understand their purpose and the value of what they're doing. So I think that those are the things that, sort of story, listening, and purpose that are consistent in terms of the folks who are more successful and the kinds of companies that I back as an investor as well.
Yeah, that totally corresponds what I have learned in the course. And you also mentioned you're guiding companies in climate and sustainability sector. And do you want to share your thoughts about that?
Without question, to me, the most significant issue we can do a lot of cool things, but if the planet doesn't support it, health issues are related to climate issues, equity issues are related to climate issues, like climate runs through everything. And so, I've increasingly started to focus on climate. And I think that it's also interesting and it's a huge market. It's the most important, it's the next industrial revolution in terms of we're correcting the results of the first industrial revolution. So it's massively complex, massively interesting, massively impactful, universal across demographics, and climate change, while people with money maybe can insulate themselves, it's still, we're all impacted by it. So it's one of those things. I think one of the things that I found in my theater work, I did a project around walking and then the project around food and eating. One of the reasons I gravitated toward those subjects is because I don't care who you are, even if you can't walk, you have a relationship with walking. Everybody has a relationship with food. So I've always tried to look for topics that can bring a broad range of people around a table. And climate is certainly one of those. And there's so many different aspects of it. So it also allows me to indulge my interest for a broad palette of things, yet around the focus of climate and climate change. And there are many subcategories. So I think that's what it is. And as a sort of personal interest in terms of the importance of the future. And then it's my investment theses have evolved as well, looking at, risk management and how I, also my goals for investing they're about making money, but they're also around having an impact. That's the place I feel like I can do a little tiny bit.
Yeah, I can see like your empathy toward people and startups. And I totally agree that we need to make a lot of effort to make up for all this carbon oxide we have emitted. So it definitely requires a lot of investment and there will be a lot of opportunities. Do you want to share like something you recently do in Sticky Lab? I walked through that website. It's really good and a lot of blogs.
Yeah. So the place that I love with startups is like from 0 to 20 people or -0, the napkin sketch till you get a good team in place, just as you're on the cusp of like, Series A. I really just like that kind of digging in. And I've done that a lot and gone a little bit beyond. And so when I decided to leave Saganworks, it was really like a month before the pandemic. And I was sort of thinking, what am I going to do? And I had already sort of reserved Sticky Lab as a place that I knew I wanted to work on sticky problems. That's really what Sticky Lab is about, sticky problems, sticky stories. So I wasn't sure what it was going to be. And I started writing a little bit, and then I was coaching, and I sort of literally, it's been a couple of years of what do I want to be when I grow up? What's the next stage of my career? I needed a break, having started 3 companies from zero money to profitability or to exit or to getting to the next step with Saganworks. I knew I didn't want to start another company. I didn't want responsibility for that. I wanted, for the first time in 25 years, not to worry about payroll, not to have to worry about, other people's families and things. Because that's one of the, kind of backtracking with Local Orbit and even with Walk and Squawk, because we had 25 employees at one time. When my first employee had a baby, it kind of like gave me pause. When you're building a startup, because they're so high risk. And I'm thinking, I now have a baby to take care of. And so that layer of responsibility resonated with me a lot. And so, I dug in and worked hard. So I'm not in a place where I don't think I want to do another startup, at least right now. The things that I loved about being a founder was engaging in complex problem solving. And I also really like the mentoring. So I started to look at coaching and mentoring, and having built relationships with people. And because I have such a broad sort of array of experiences and networks, I have some good strategic thinking skills and network advantages. And so Sticky Lab has just become a kind of just a place where all the things that I do can be stirred up in a little pot. And I just run my own consulting, mentoring, teaching, and investing from it. So it's not a startup per se. I'm never going to have an employee with it. And I am thinking about some products that I can develop through Sticky Lab. But right now I'm just kind of having a really good time teaching, because it's only my first year. This is only the second term I've been teaching, and working with a lot of startups and mentoring programs. So it's sort of, Sticky Lab is a catch-all for the themes that run across my work.
Talking about teaching, I know you are teaching entrepreneurship for 10 about finding your venture, where we are asked to realizing our idea to an actual startup, and we're taught how to do that step by step. And you also mentioned you have another course about creativity. Do you want to talk about these 2 courses to all our audience?
Yeah. So the Finding Your Venture, I'm filling in for somebody who's on leave, to co-teach it. It's nice for me to get a sense of the students. It's considered a first step for a lot of the entrepreneurship classes. It's kind of a very high level overview. And, you don't go deep, but you get to try all the different aspects of starting a company. And I'm glad you found it really useful. I teach a practicum, which is part of the core requirements, which people go much deeper into customer discovery and product experimenting and deciding if a venture is worth doing. We talk about a go, no go decision. You do enough research to say, do I keep on going? And you ultimately build out sort of a prototype of a product with groups. And then the class that I started teaching last year, that I'm also teaching this fall, and I will probably every fall, is called Creativity and Product Development. And it was a class that had been on hiatus, and I've been able to redesign it and bringing sort of the creativity that comes from my artistic practice come into how this overlaps with entrepreneurship and product development. And kind of, again, going and working on cultivating the sense of curiosity. And I bring some exercises, very low key exercises that come from my theater practice, into helping people develop new ways to approach questions and problems. So I think, and we talk a lot about value and values and culture. And then we talk a lot about storytelling. Every class is filled with story. I bring in a lot of speakers, guest speakers from different startups that I work with, different networks. And I think that the 3 classes are really sort of distinct approaches to entrepreneurship that intersect, but I can focus on different areas with them. I think that what's interesting about the Center for Entrepreneurship is that it's, even if it's in the College of Engineering, it's truly across the university. The students come from all different programs as opposed to coming from a specific set of interests. And so you do tend to get some really interesting, bumping up of ideas and approaches and thinking. And so it's fun. It's another place where I think I can take the experience and help, folks like you figure out how they can best make a better future.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that sounds great. And hope this episode can bring those 3 courses to more students in Michigan. And I really want to check it out to see if I can take the creativity class next year.
Yeah.
You mentioned that you're teaching all those classes and talking to students a lot. I wonder, do you have some general advice for students, especially for our folks in Michigan?
Focus on being curious, I think. And it overlaps with what we've talked about. I think that focusing on what we call soft skills rather than like specific expertise is really important. The world is changing very fast. The jobs that we have today are not going to be the jobs of 20 years from now, or even 15 years from now. We're already seeing this. And that's true across history. This isn't a unique period in time. So I think less expertise, more curiosity and creativity, and the ability to learn and to communicate and tell stories. I mean, those things that we've talked about are, I think, the most important thing. It's more important than getting a degree, with specific financial skills, or if you are doing something that you need sort of specific STEM or engineering skills or design skills, make sure that there's enough broad-based sort of softer skills that are part of your toolkit that you walk away with, and that you get comfortable with that. And then I will say this other thing. In my creativity and product development class, one of the assignments is for people to read a novel. And there's some reflective questions around it, but it's really important to read not just business or nonfiction, but to read stories and read books, because it helps you get into people's heads. It helps you understand other cultures. It helps you, often there's kind of a moral compass. There's a moral story or a morality to it. And so I think that, continuing to read other people's stories is only going to help you in whatever else you do.
I totally agree on that. As I think as an immigrant to the States, so one of the really important things that helped me to know more about the American culture is to read the fictions and novels. I think with that being said, that's our last part of this episode. We'll have 3 rapid fire questions for you. Are you ready for that?
I'm ready. Ready.
Perfect. The first one, knowing that you have a lot of background experience in arts and performance, who is your favorite artist?
It's too hard to choose. I cannot choose. There are many.
Okay, we'll leave that alone. Second one is, what is your favorite movie?
And I will say the same answer to that. I will answer the third question though. But yeah, again, there's so many interesting. No, it's a really hard choice.
Third one is, what is your favorite book?
So I'm going to say it may not be my favorite book, but the most impactful book that sort of changed the trajectory of my work from walking from theater to Local Orbit is a book called Wanderlust, A History of Walking by Rebecca Solnit, Solnit. And there's another book that she's written that I actually keep coming back to. It's called Hope in the Dark. And so it's really a favorite writer, or a writer that helps me a lot. Both of them are nonfiction, even though I think fiction is really important. But Wanderlust really led me to create an entire theater project that led me to study technology that turned into the rest of my life. And Hope in the Dark is about looking at history and understanding how far we've come in such a short time when things seem really bad. So it's about context. So Rebecca Solnit is a writer that I would say, we can put some links to her stuff below this.
Yeah, that's what we're gonna do.
Okay.
Well, that's all of the questions for this episode. Thank you so much, Professor Erika.
Thank you, guys. And I look forward to seeing this.